Welcome to the Super Awesome You. Coming to you on the Super Awesome Mix podcast network, I'm your host, Samra Obuselbi, and every single week we'll be tackling topics around motivation, going after goals, the struggles of all of it, and of course the science that kind of gets us moving and why do we act the way that we do. Since this is a Super Awesome Mix show, we'll also be building a playlist week after week, and you can check out the link to that in the show notes. This week I'm going to be covering a topic that I like to think of as measuring progress that sometimes is really difficult to measure. In other words, like invisible progress or small progress is still progress. With that, I'm going to bring up a book that I read a little while ago. I think it was over 2 years ago now, called The Slight Edge. This was recommended by a friend of mine. And he said that this book is kind of like the first step to every other book that you'll read on the topic of going after something you care about. And in retrospect, he was absolutely right, because the core tenet of this book is that basically we are never still. Even when we think days are the same or when we think that we're not making progress, we're moving. We're either getting a little bit closer towards where we want to be or a little bit further from where we want to be. And you see this actually all the way down to the molecular level. Like, we are actually never still. Electrons are flying around, protons and neutrons or atoms are banging around against each other. Everything is in motion all the time, which is really kind of amazing when you think about it. I mean, even at the macro level, our planet is currently flying through space at an alarming rate, and we are also rotating around a sun, which is also flying through space, and everything is just literally moving all the time. And our lives work basically the same way. Whenever we are making decisions, no matter how large or small these decisions may seem, we are essentially moving towards something that we want or away from that thing that we want. And this is best illustrated by my, recent struggles with my weight. Like many people during the pandemic, I gained a lot of weight. Not commuting every single day anymore, and then also just stress eating my way through it. I put on a really shocking amount of weight. And finally, at some point, I hit my breaking point of just being like, oh my gosh, enough is enough. And what was interesting about it is that I didn't put it on all at once, because that never happens, right? Like, your weight doesn't just suddenly jump 20 or 30 or 40 pounds. It just seems to happen almost invisibly. And then one day you step on a scale and you're like, oh, how did this happen? This seemed to just have happened, all of a sudden. And it's because of a bunch of decisions along the way. And I'm not faulting myself for those decisions. At the time, they were absolutely correct. For me, like, it was how I was dealing with things. And that is true for a lot of people. Like, you should never blame yourself or be hard on yourself, which is really easy to do, by the way. But you should just take stock in the fact that you made a lot of decisions and now you're here. And okay, so what's next, right? And I realized that all of those very small decisions that got me to an increased weight, I could be making small decisions that would get me to a decreased weight. So everything that I did that got me to, the weight that I was unhappy with, if I started to think about all those decisions in a different direction, then maybe I could get down to where I want to be. And I'm really happy to report that, honestly, I struggled with trying to do that for a year and a half, but now I am right back to where I was right before the pandemic, and I've lost all that extra weight. And it's been easily a year and a half of trying to do that. So again, it was not an overnight thing. It was not easy. I continue to struggle with it at times and get frustrated whenever I notice that, like, I started to put weight back on and I fell back into old habits. But it's getting easier and easier now, to make those decisions and to be more mindful about the decisions I'm making, because that's ultimately what we have power over. We don't really have power over what we're going to do in a year or in 5 years or in 10 years, but we do have power over what we're going to do today. So whenever I was presented with a choice of like, hey, you're feeling kind of full, but this food is really good, why don't you go and get another plate? I thought to myself, well, hey, that seems like one of those small decisions that leads to extra weight. Because in the moment, I'm like, yeah, sure, pile it on. This tastes great. But then I remembered that, if I keep doing that every single day like I was doing, I'm going to end up right back where I was at a weight that I felt unhealthy in and unhappy in. And so I would just take that moment and be like, as good as this is, I don't need to eat another plate right now because my body's telling me I'm full and I'm content, and I'm probably going to regret it if I take that plate. And that is that tiny little decision. You know, sometimes in the beginning it feels like a really big decision, but it gets easier and easier and becomes smaller and more automatic. And then again, I've reversed course, and now I'm at a weight where, thank goodness, I feel a lot happier. I just have to keep doing this every single day. That was the other thing that I've come to realize, is that these things don't just stay still. You know, I always wish that you could, like, January 1st, just go and work out the entire 24 hours and you're like, well, I'm done for the year of exercising. I've done it all on January 1st and I don't need to do it ever again. But of course, that's not how it works. And that is the whole point of what the Slight Edge is about, is that you have to keep showing up for yourself and you have to make these decisions all the time. But that if you shrink those decisions down and think about whether it takes you a little bit closer to where you want to go, or does it take you a little bit further from where you want to go, it starts to get a lot easier. And before you know it, you're exactly where you want to be. And I think that that's such a powerful realization, and one that has certainly been life-changing for me. Another way to think about this is, if you had started something a year ago, how would you feel about where you are today? And that was another, like, kind of mind-blowing thought that I had. So if I had started running a year ago, I mean, where I would be today sounds amazing, right? I probably would be way more fit. I probably would have great times again. I'd probably be very similar to whenever I used to run, you know, cross country in high school. And I'd just feel good. My legs would be in great shape. My lungs would be in great shape. And that is true if I had started a year ago. But guess what? How do I get there in 2023? Well, I start today. And I start doing a little bit every single day from here until December 2023. And then a year would have gone by, and I bet that I would be in a massively different place. And that has been so cool with this podcast and with our Instagram account because, you know, again, I started it with 0 followers. And now at the time of this recording, we're pushing 7,000. And I never would have imagined that we would be reaching 7,000, because I used to look at accounts with like 200 followers and be like, how did they do that? And the secret, you know, is no secret at all. It's like you just keep showing up and you consistently post and you interact with your community, and like you just show up and you do the work and you make those little decisions that help you grow your account. So that is today's takeaway. Maybe pick up the Slight Edge, or at least like read a summary of it, because honestly, it's one of those books where it's like, if you get the summary of it, you've kind of read the whole book. But it's fine to read the whole book. I don't think it's that expensive. And start to think about your decisions of whether or not they're going to get you closer where you want to be, or are they getting you further away from where you want to be? Because again, there is no steady state. We are always in motion. All right, today's song of the week is "What Are You Going to Do When You're Not Saving the World" by Hans Zimmer, and it is off of the Man of Steel soundtrack. The reason for this pick is actually is one of my most listened to, according to Spotify, songs of 2022. And it is one of my most listened to, of course. I mean, they know that, and they are correct. The data does not lie in this case. It is one of my all-time favorite songs to just kind of like work to, because everything that you do, again, there's going to be a theme here, but everything you do when you listen to this song, especially as the music swells and it builds, I mean, he is so good at that. You just feel very epic and powerful, and like, you know, you're out there saving the world, even if you're just like typing a Word document or sending an email or checking on your Instagram account. It just makes everything feel a little bit more cinematic, which makes sense because it's off of a movie soundtrack. I hope that this song, as you listen to it, you can go into this week feeling really empowered to make all those small decisions and trust that over time, they're going to build up into something really, really powerful. So with that, I hope you have a super awesome week ahead of you. Be sure to follow this podcast, share it with friends that you think would love it. Find us on Instagram at SuperAwesomeMix. And until next week, I'm your host, Sam Robiselby. Talk to you then.